Welcome everyone to the Southwest Region Fisheries Virtual Open House. I'm Evan O'Neill, the Regional Communications Manager here in the Southwest region, and your moderator for this evening's event. We're here tonight to hear your ideas and answer questions related to our efforts to build the 2022 through 2024 fishing season booklet that all of us as anglers carry while we're in the field. The current fishing season booklet expires at the end of 2021. This one right here. And tonight's get together is part of Fish and Game's formal scoping effort, the first big step in developing the fishing season booklet. Now, folks often ask about the process that leads to this booklet landing at your favorite vendor every 3 years. Here's a timeline of how that works. We gather data and we have informal scoping all the time, talking to anglers in the field, doing research projects, etc. And so that's always ongoing, and we're always collecting that information and logging it for future use. And then we're now in the formal scoping process, which is going on right now through April 11th. That's the last day you have to comment, to provide us comment or questions that we might want to consider further down the road. And then from that effort, staff put together proposals that they then take to the Fish and Game Commission for their consideration. Following input from the Fish and Game Commission and additional comment from the public, we put together those formal proposals, and then from there, we take those formal proposals to the Fish and Game Commission for final implementation, or what's generally final implementation. The Commission, of course, has the latitude to make changes to recommendations that we make to them, but those are generally set at the November meeting, and then that information goes to the press very quickly, and let me get back to here. Goes to the press very quickly. We turn that booklet around and have it on the shelves, hopefully the first part of January of 2022. So we've already got some questions that have come in from folks, and we're going to get to those in just a few moments. But before we do that, I wanted to take a moment to introduce a couple of our staff members that are here tonight to share information with all of you. The first is John Casanelli. John is the Regional Fisheries Manager here in the southern portion of the Southwest region. He's located in the Nampa office.
Thanks, Evan. So yeah, I'm just going to run you guys through a few slides here and get you going on the southern portion of the region. And so I want to briefly introduce you to my staff. As Evan mentioned, my name is John Casanelli. I am the Regional Fisheries Manager for the Nampa portion of the Southwest region. I have two biologists that work underneath me, Cindy Now and Tim D'Amico. Cindy's pictured there in the center photo, and Tim is pictured on the right. Both of them are on the call tonight and will be taking some of your questions and answering questions. I've included all of our emails here for you guys to see. I send out a quarterly and sometimes more frequent than quarterly fisheries email update. And I've got a list of about 500 anglers I send that email to. If that's a list you're not on and something you're interested in being on, take a picture of my email or write it down quickly and email me, and I'll get you on that list and I'll add you to the distribution for those emails. Just a quick rundown of the Southwest region. So McCall and Nampa are both on the call tonight, and you'll hear from the Nampa Fisheries Manager here shortly. But I wanted to quickly kind of show you the boundaries of the Nampa subregion. So it's a big region. We go all the way from the Oregon border to the west, down to the Nevada border to the south. To the east, we go to the Bruno River, and then up in the Boise drainage, we go up the South Fork to Anderson Ranch Dam. We have pretty much the entirety of the western half of the Sawtooth Range. So the Sawtooth Ridge is our border, and then we go up the Payette to the middle or the South Fork drainage of the Payette. And then along the Weiser, we go up to the West Fork of the Weiser River. And so that's the Nampa portion of the subregion, and those are the waters that me and my staff are responsible for. It's a very diverse region, you know, going from the Owyhee Desert to the south, which is the you know, most remote portion of the lower 48 states, where we've got these very remote desert streams that are home to red band trout, coming north into the Snake Plain, where we've got the large Snake River and many run-of-the-river large reservoirs along the Snake River. And then coming into the Treasure Valley, which is the most populated area in Idaho. So we've got the largest city in Idaho and all of the urban fisheries related to that. And then moving into the Boise front and up into the Sawtooth, where we've got some high mountain lakes that are some of the most remote lakes to hike to in the state, sometimes up to 15 or 20 miles in. So very diverse. And with that diversity of waters, of course, we have a very diverse fish assemblage in the region, all sorts of cold water species, various types of trout, lots of warm water species. We've got sturgeon in the region. We've got even have some Chinook in the region that we manage up in Elk River, or Elk Creek and Bear Valley. And so I would argue that the Southwest region might be the most diverse fish management zone in the United States, and it would be hard to argue against that with the diversity of waters and habitat that we have. As far as our fishing regulation or fishing rules go, this is a list of our general regulations on the left, and those regulations apply to all of our waters unless they are a special rules water, and we have 15 special rules waters in the Nampa subregion, and those are listed on the right. So out of the hundreds of waters that we manage, most all of those are managed under these general regulations, and then you can see there's a handful of those waters that are managed under special rules. Everything I've just talked about, I covered in a pre-recorded video, which you can watch at any time on the same page where you dialed into this meeting. And so I would encourage you to watch that video and get a little more detail about the Nampa portion of the region. And with that, I will turn it back to Evan.
Thank you, John. Next, we'll hear from the regional fisheries manager up in the McCall area, Jordan Mesner.
Thanks, Evan. Hey, everybody. My name is Jordan Messner. I'm the regional fisheries manager up in the McCall subregion. So just like John did, I want to just give a brief overview of our subregion up here. First off, introducing my staff. Josh Poole in the center there holding the perch is our anadromous fisheries biologist out of McCall. So he works mainly on monitoring and evaluating wild salmon and steelhead stocks in our subregion. And then, oh, I'm not sharing my screen. There we go. Apologize for that. And then bottom right is Mike Thomas. He's our resident sport fishing biologist in the region. And our emails are there as well. So I'll give you a second there, snap a picture if you'd like to be able to get in touch with us. So the McCall subregion, we've got our western border is Hell's Canyon and the Oregon-Idaho border. Our eastern border is the Middle Fork Salmon River. And then northern border is the Salmon River. And then we border the Nampa subregion to the south. We manage several anadromous waters in our subregion, including the Little Salmon River, the South Fork Salmon, and then portions of the Middle Fork Salmon and the Salmon River Basin. These watersheds have some outstanding fishing opportunity for wild trout, as well as fishing for salmon and steelhead. And most notably, we manage the Little Salmon River and the South Fork Salmon River hatchery Chinook salmon fisheries. We also manage some outstanding resident sport fisheries in our non-anadromous waters, like the Payette Lake Trout Kokanee fishery. We have several hundred outstanding high mountain lakes in the region, some great bass waters, tons of great trout and kokanee waters, and then some warm water species as well. We've got a couple of world records in the region here, including perch out of Cascade and the world record tiger muskie out of Little Payette Lake. So John showed the general fishing regs for the Southwest region, and our waters generally fall under those same regs, but we do have some special rules waters as well up in the McCall subregion. And there's 20 of those, but they generally fall under one of three categories, either quality bass regulations, quality or trophy trout regulations, and then wild trout regs, which manage the anadromous waters in our region as catch and release only. So the last slide I wanted to show here was during our informal scoping process that Evan kind of went through there, there's really three main topics that we hear concerns from anglers with, and those are too much perch harvest on Lake Cascade. There needs to be limits there where there currently aren't. The second one being tons of smallmouth in Brownlee and Hell's Canyon, but we can't harvest any of them because of the regs that are in place there. And then lastly, we have a few mountain lakes in our subregion that have these trophy regulations with a limit of only 2/20. And folks think that we need to have more of those trophy regulations on high mountain lakes because they produce better fisheries. And I address all three of these things in the video that is posted on our webpage, and I'd encourage you to watch that video if you haven't already, and it'll hopefully address some of your questions. Otherwise, please submit questions and comments to us during this open house period, because that's why we're here, is to get your questions and listen to your concerns and try to give you some some information that will help your understanding of why we're managing these fisheries in a particular way. So with that, I will turn it back to Evan as well.
Thank you, Jordan. As both John and Jordan mentioned, if you've not had a chance to take a look at those overview videos that are on the comment page, I encourage you to do so. There's some really great information there that, as Jordan mentioned, will help you better understand why we manage some of our fisheries the way we do, and also kind of give you an idea of some of the questions that we're pondering during this during the scoping session. With that, I also wanted to encourage you, if you have a question that you'd like to submit to us tonight, you can do that while you're watching our video this evening. It's the comment form is right below the video that you're viewing right now. So if you scroll down, you'll see that form. You can fill it out and throw that question to us, and we will try to answer that tonight while we're meeting together. So with that, I wanted to get to our very first question tonight. Let's see here. This particular question is for Tim D'Amico, one of our fisheries biologists that John introduced earlier. Tim, the question is, the Boise River through Boise is one of the most productive urban trout fisheries in the West. With increased valley population growth, it seems like more and more people are fishing the Boise River. And here's the question: should there be more restrictive gear and harvest regulations on the river to protect wild rainbow and brown trout?
Thank you, Evan, and thanks for the question. So that is a question that we are receiving quite a few folks asking. And the Boise River, like Evan mentioned in the question, or the user submitted the question, it is a productive trout fishery through one of the more urban areas in Idaho. We are currently monitoring the trout population where we've got mark recapture population assessments. So we do those pretty much every 3 years, going back to the early 2000s, which show a stable population. Every year we also monitor fry juvenile trout to determine not only how much fry are being produced, but also looking at flow impacts on year specific recruitment. So how many, in a water year, how many fish can we expect the following years? We're currently also undergoing a survey that is actually a repeat of a survey we conducted in 2015, where we're looking at using our Tag Your It program to evaluate angler use and exploitation. So essentially, how many fish are caught, and of those, how many fish are being harvested. And these are very preliminary results. So the previous survey was conducted in 2015. We're repeating it again this year and next year. And so preliminary results, we're showing some pretty similar use and harvest. So how many fish are being captured and how many fish are being harvested. And both of those are pretty low. We also already have a special regulation section on the Boise River between East Park Center Bridge and West Park Center Bridge. And so we have kind of that opportunity as well. And another thing I guess I'd like to touch on is we are also working on a project where we're taking fertilized eggs, trout eggs, and putting them into the Boise River to also promote recruitment. So we have a lot of different ways that we're monitoring the population to make sure that we can continue to provide fisheries into the future. And I'll give it back to Evan here.
Thank you, Tim. Our next question is for John Casanelli. John, this is related to the question that Tim just answered. The regulations on the Boise currently have a 2 trout limit, none under 14 inches on the upper section. Fish and Game has reported for years that harvest isn't enough to negatively impact the fishery. So why not just have all the regs the same as the lower portion of the Boise?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Evan, and whoever submitted it. So yeah, as you heard Tim just explain, he kind of echoed what you said in your question. We've got this kind of quality section between the Park Center bridges from West to East Park Center Bridge, where we have a regulation that says only 2 fish, none under 14. And the question is related to why even have that when we've repeatedly said and just said in the previous answer that harvest isn't necessarily driving down that population. And the answer to that question is it's to provide some diversity. So most of our rules, we try to take a biological approach to how we come up with those, or regulations, sorry, but we also want to provide some diversity. And it's pretty common for us, and it's been a common theme for our web comments leading up to this meeting, and it may be a common theme to the comments coming in tonight, as there's a lot of anglers out there that want more restrictive regulations on the entirety of the lower Boise because they see the increased growth and the increased use, and there's fear that with the general reg, we might drive that population down through overharvest. So even though we don't have data to support that, there's an angler contingent that wants to have that sort of special reg, and we want to provide that diversity. So that section of river, it's a small section of the overall lower Boise, and we think having that special reg on there to provide a little bit of diversity to our anglers is a good thing, even though biologically we don't see that really making a difference in the fish population. And I'll send it back to you, Evan.
Thank you, John. Well, as anglers are often prone to do, they often ask questions about how the fishing is right now. And we've got one of those questions here for Jordan. Jordan, the question is, what's the forecast for Chinook salmon this year on the Little Salmon River and the South Fork Salmon River?
Sure, thanks, Evan, and thanks whoever submitted that question. So please understand that all we have right now to go off of our preseason forecasts, and I'm going to share my screen here. Our preseason forecast for the Rapid River Run this year, which provides the fishing opportunity to the Lower Salmon River and the Little Salmon River, is about 1,200 fish. Chinook have just barely started coming over Bonneville Dam right now, and so we'll get a better understanding of how many hatchery Chinook are actually expected to return to Rapid River Hatchery in some time here. But based on that 1,200 harvestable share, that's 1,200 harvestable share for the sport fishery in excess of broodstock needs. We plan on having a 4-day-a-week fishery, and in fact, the commission approved that fishery at their last meeting. That's going to start on April 24th with a 1 adult limit per day, open 4 days a week, and that's on the Lower Salmon and the Little Salmon. Please keep in mind this could change as the run actually materializes, and we'll keep everybody in the loop on that. This harvest matrix here is something that we developed with angler input over the last couple of years. And basically, if the harvestable share does come in above 2,000 or below 750 fish, we would likely recommend to the commission that they tweak the season in accordance with this harvest share matrix here. And so on the South Fork salmon, the preseason forecast is only estimating that about 120 adult Chinook will be available for harvest on the South Fork this year. And so again, this is a harvest share matrix that we put together with angler input for the South Fork Salmon River fishery. And based on this table, you can see below about 150 fish harvest share, we propose no fishery on the South Fork. And so that's where we sit right now. We are not proposing a fishery for the South Fork, but again, that is a summer run. They come in even later than the spring Chinook that return to Rapid River. And so it'll be some time before we have a better handle on how many Chinook are actually expected to return to the South Fork. And if that number comes in higher, we would like to see those excess fish go into the hands of anglers by operating a fishery rather than not having a fishery in that case. So stay tuned. Thank you, Evan. Back to you.
Thanks, Jordan. Our next question is for Mike Thomas up in McCall. This is a kind of a one question that we distilled a whole bunch of similar questions down to, because it's gotten a lot of interest from local anglers. But has Fish and Game considered placing harvest limits on Cascade perch? Angler effort and harvest have been increasing, and people are taking home way too many perch. We've already seen catch rates on large perch decline over the last few years, and if this continues, we might lose this outstanding resource as a result of overfishing. So the question is, has Fish and Game considered placing harvest limits on Cascade perch?
Hey, Evan. Yeah, that's been a common theme in the comments submitted for Lake Cascade, and it's something that Jordan touched on some of our harvest statistics in his presentation that he provided for the McCall subregion, but I'll kind of try to touch on it from a different angle here. We know that effort has been increasing in Lake Cascade, and that catch rates of large perch have been declining over the last several years. And we also know that there are some anglers, groups of anglers that take home a lot of big perch. And I can totally understand how this could lead to the perception that overfishing is the cause of this decline in catch rates of big fish. However, we have been closely monitoring the perch fishery in Lake Cascade for a long time now, and our data does not indicate that angler harvest is the cause of this decline. In fact, our data indicates that for each perch harvested by an angler, 2 are dying of natural causes. So because overall mortality is so low in Lake Cascade, the perch are able to reach some extraordinary ages. The larger perch that we kind of collectively refer to as jumbos are about 8 to 16 years old, and that is unheard of in yellow perch populations, and frankly would not be possible if angler harvest was a big factor in mortality. So with saying that, I'm going to try to bring up a figure here and try to touch more on what we think is happening and causing these changes in the fishery. And perch in general are notorious for boom and bust cycles or cyclic patterns. And that's what we're seeing right now in Cascade. This figure here shows lengths of perch caught in our gillnet surveys since 2012. And you can see that in 2013, we saw a large group of 4-year-olds enter the fishery. And we know that when a perch reaches about 4 years old, 4 or 5 in Lake Cascade, 9 or 10 inches, mortality drops dramatically, and we see them progress through the fishery. And you can see this in this figure. As these fish grow and age, these are the majority of the jumbos that we've been fishing on and enjoying for the last 8 years. But more importantly, if you notice, there isn't a whole lot of fish coming up behind them. There haven't been those big groups of age 4 and 5 fish entering the fishery anywhere close to what they were doing in 2013. Now, as jumbos are starting to die off, which we've been seeing and talking about in the last couple of years through both harvest and natural causes like old age, we're starting to see signs of better recruitment. And you can see that in 2019 and 2020, we're starting to see more 8 to 10-inch fish caught by anglers and certainly in our gill nets. And so if we saw that harvest was a big driver of these cycles, we would definitely consider limits. But what we see right now in Lake Cascade is variable recruitment. It's a recruitment issue. And moving forward, we're going to look, broaden our program to explore ways to produce more age fours, to see if there are any levers that we can pull to boost production of age fours, and to better understand those sources of high mortality rates we see in our juvenile perch. Because again, when fish hit about 4 years old, they tend to persist in the fishery, and that would provide a more consistent fishery. So moving forward, if at any point we do start to see that limits could improve this fishery, we'll certainly do that and propose that. But currently, our data does not suggest that angler harvest is the primary factor. So I hope that that addresses the concern. And I appreciate people reaching out and providing that input.
Thank you, Mike. Here's another question that's gotten a ton of play from folks, and it's very similar to the Cascade question. This one is for Cindy. Similar to Cascade, why don't we have a crappie limit on CJ Strike Reservoir? This particular caller said that they're seeing large numbers of anglers taking home large numbers of crappie. So I guess the concern there is similar for Cascade, that we might be overfishing the crappie fishery in CJ. So Cindy, can you tell us or give us an answer to that question?
Yep, sure, Evan. And thank you to whoever submitted the question. This is going to sound a whole lot like what we just heard from Mike. And John also covered this in his pre-recorded video, so there's a little more information there as well. But yeah, really similar to yellow perch, crappie are also known for these big boom and bust year classes. And the variability comes from the recruitment. So the survival from egg to adult that you can catch on a hook. And so even though these fish produce a ton of eggs and we see evidence of reproduction every year, that recruitment and survival through the age classes is where we get this variability. And that's likely driven by things that we can't necessarily control, things like weather, water temperatures, reservoir conditions, and predation within the reservoir itself. And so 2017 was our last boom year, and nearly all the fish that anglers are catching now are coming from that 2017 year class that we've been tracking over time. And so we've had a really elaborate survey protocol in place since this year class came on. And if you've spent any time out on the reservoir, you've likely seen us out there. We're out there in the spring and the fall doing a relative abundance index. We do larval tows, we do otter trawls in the fall. And some of you have probably talked to us at our check stations at the Cottonwood or the Air Force boat ramp. And so based on all this data that we've amassed through our surveys and the creel surveys, as well as the tag return data from the Tag Your It database, the highest yearly harvest that we've ever seen on crappie and CJ Strike Reservoir is about 20%, but most years it's closer to 11. And these are not high enough levels to drive down that population. Natural mortality is almost certainly always higher than the angler harvest rates in CJ Strike. And that's especially true as these fish are getting older. So crappie and CJ rarely live to be over 5 years. Occasionally we'll see a 6-year-old fish, but that's super old. And so these 2017 fish that everyone's enjoying right now are closing in on their 4th year. So they're starting to get older and starting to age out of that population. And we just haven't seen any more of these big pulses of recruitment that we saw in 2017. So there's not a whole lot of young fish to follow this big year class through and replace them in the fishery. And so this 2017 year class is going to start to age out of the population. whether anglers harvest them or not, similar to what Mike was saying about the perch. They're basically dying of old age, and anglers should really get out there and enjoy the fishing while it's so spectacular, because it's going to be a few years before we see another big year class, and they're coming, but it's going to take them a little bit to kind of ramp up to the levels that we've enjoyed from the 2017 fish. But we currently don't have any data to suggest that changing the harvest regulation would prolong them in the fishery, since they're really dying of old age more than they're dying of angler harvest. And again, this, like Mike was saying, with the yellow perch, like this could change in the future. And if we think that if we see changes in angler harvest that we think could benefit we could benefit that fishery with a change in regulations, that will happen in the future. But right now, we just don't really have any data to say that that would help.
Thank you, Cindy. Appreciate that insightful answer. Our next question is for John Casanelli. John, this is regarding bass fishing in Brownlee. And this could have been me submitting this question. When I go bass fishing at Brownlee Reservoir, the majority of the bass I catch are all under 12 inches. Have you considered removing the length restriction to allow anglers to harvest some of these smaller bass so that the remaining fish can grow bigger with less competition?
Thanks, Evan. So yeah, this is almost continuing on the same kind of trend as we've been talking with perch and crappie, not quite the level of cyclic fluctuations that we see there. I'll show you a graph here in a minute, but yeah, so we hear this a lot too, right? We've got a 12-inch general reg minimum size for all of our bass fisheries across the region. And what we hear pretty routinely from anglers is I go out fishing, you know, at Brownlee, maybe even at CJ on the Snake, a lot of our more prolific bass fisheries, I fish all day and 90% of the fish I catch are under 12 inches. That's what's out there. Why do you have this limit? Let us keep some of those, thin the population out, give those fish an opportunity to grow. And so I guess I'll just briefly talk about a couple things when it comes to bass. One of those is that, let me share my screen quickly here. So this is Idaho Power data from bass populations in Brownlee from 2000 through 2020. So you've got 2001 down to 10 here, and these are spring and fall surveys, and then you've got 11 down to 20 here. I'm not going to bore you with all this data, but what I guess I just want to show you is that we see kind of the same thing with bass as Cindy and Mike were talking about with perch and crappie, and that we'll get a big year class, they'll age, they'll get to, you know, 4 or 5 years old, they'll cross that blue line, which is the 12-inch size limit, and you'll have years like 2007 where you've got a bunch of those bigger fish out there. Those fish will even continue into 2008, and then it kind of resets until you get this other big group that are bumping through, and you can see that, you know, in 4 or 5 years they get old enough and they recruit to that size limit in the fishery. And so we do have years like 2015 where there's just not a lot of fish over that 12-inch limit. And so anglers go out there, they fish all day, and they're catching a lot of these small fish, and they want to be able to harvest some of those. And so I guess the point being, we have that 12-inch limit in place because we're trying to protect those fish until they get up to spawning size, and that's kind of why that regulation has been around. And we don't want a lot of those fish pulled out of the system before they have a chance to reproduce. We are starting a statewide bass evaluation through our research office. So those of you that aren't familiar, we have an office in South Nampa that's a fisheries research office that's fully dedicated just to doing research programs or projects. And so they're going to start a bass, a large reservoir bass research project starting this year, because one of the things that we know is that as bass get larger, we can't as effectively sample them. And so in all this Idaho Power data, that's all electrofishing data. A lot of the fact that we don't see a lot of these big fish in the survey is just because they're not as catchable with electrofishing gear. They're in deeper water, they're hard to get our hands on. When we look at the tournament returns, and so all of the fishing tournaments, and in the summer, there's almost a fishing tournament on Brownlee and on CJ every weekend from May through August. And when we look at the weigh-ins from those tournaments, we see pretty consistent catch of large bass in those tournaments. And so we know those fish are out there. We know that we're a little bit inconsistent in getting our hands on them. And so we're going to do some work to see how we can sample those fish better, put some tags in those bigger fish, and look at angular exploitation. The only other thing I'll mention, since I'm talking about bass, is any of you that were around 3 years ago when we went through this cycle last time probably remember that we had an ongoing Snake River bass graduate study at that time, and that was just wrapping up. And so the one thing I'll mention from that is that in the Snake River, we found that, fish hit this 12-inch threshold when they're about 4 years old. We found that all those fish in the Snake were in pretty good condition, and that was including the lower Boise, the lower Weiser, and the lower Payette. And that overall bass harvest is very low. And so even when anglers encounter fish that are over this 12-inch threshold, the rate at which those anglers take those fish home is very low. Bass fishermen in general tend to be catch and release oriented. The only other thing I'll point out from that is that we saw a lot of movement of bass in the Snake River. Some of those fish were moving up to 30, 40 miles. And so we know that these systems are all intertwined and that a lot of these fish are moving around. And so we want to take another look at this general bass reg and see if there's an opportunity to maybe have some more special regs in certain waters. But at this point, we really want to go through this research process and get the data we need to guide those decisions and move forward with that. Probably within the next rule cycle, we'll be looking at revisiting that. And Evan, I will send it back to you.
Thank you, John. Our next question is, again, one that we've gotten a fair amount of play on. And this one goes over to Tim again. Tim, the person says, I love to kokanee fish, yet both Lucky Peak and Arrow Rock have been slow for kokanee for the last 4 to 5 years. Why is that? And what is the department doing to improve the kokanee fisheries in these reservoirs?
Thanks, Evan. And yeah, thank you for the question. That is certainly one that we get quite a few anglers wanting to know about the kokanee fisheries in Lucky Peak and Arrow Rock. So I guess like the question stated, I believe they've been fishing Lucky Peak and Arrow Rock for about 4 or 5 years. So during that time, kind of the water years, if you will, 2016 through 2017 and 2018, we had Snowmageddon in 2017. Those were kind of, as we would like to think, they're relatively poor water flow regimes for kokanee survival, and that likely led to the reduced fishery during that time period. And one thing that we think definitely was a factor was entrainment. So that's when a fish, say, starts in a reservoir and then essentially gets flushed out the bottom. But so I guess the second part of the question was, what management actions are we taking? So in 2019, we changed the stocking location where we're putting fish into Lucky Peak. We figured out that we were putting them at Spring Shores, and now we're putting them at Roby Creek. And the temperature at Spring Shores was much higher compared to Roby Creek. And so we're trying to put them by putting them at Roby Creek, we're putting them into a cooler environment, and hopefully that'll improve some survival. We're also continuing to monitor reservoir conditions, like I mentioned, with those flow years or water years, 2016, 2017, 2018, all the way up to current. We've been doing some predator evaluations, looking to see how many, if we are having any kokanee predation by things such as northern pike minnow. We really aren't seeing that much predation by northern pike minnow. We've done those predator gill netting efforts the last 2 years, and that predation by pike minnow is really not as much of a factor as we thought it was. So I guess moving forward in terms of the management actions that we are taking, like John mentioned, we're collaborating with our research office. They're conducting a size of release study. So we'll be stocking 3-inch fingerlings as well as 4-inch fingerlings. And the thought being that, maybe the 4-inch fingerlings will survive better and return to creel, essentially, so that they're able to be harvested by anglers. As part of that size at release study, we're also able to figure out where those 3-inch or 4-inch fingerlings are going into. So we are currently evaluating them on kind of a larger scale. So we've got marks for Anderson Ranch, Arrow Rock Reservoir, as well as Lucky Peak. And so getting at that entrainment, we know if fish that were stocked into, say, Anderson Ranch or Arrow Rock are ending up into Lucky Peak. We're also doing another study that's looking at the proportion of natural versus hatchery origin fish, and that's kind of just barely coming online, working with the University of Idaho. And then we're also doing our annual creel surveys, and as well as our fall index surveys. So the creel surveys, you've probably seen us out on the way out of Lucky Peak, and we'll be checking anglers to see how many fish they caught, how long they spent fishing, and that gives us a good idea of kind of what the fishery looks like. And then in the fall, we conduct these index surveys. So it's after all of the fish have spawned. So it's typically in late October or so. And that gives us kind of an index of what we can expect for the fishery the following year. And so I guess I guess kind of hot off the press good news is that our index survey from 2020 for Lucky Peak especially was about 30% higher than it has been the past few years. And so we're hoping that 2021 Lucky Peak should be a good fishery. And with that, I'll send that back to Evan.
Thank you, Tim. Our next question is, so we're going to go back to Cindy now. Cindy, do we have crawdads here in Idaho? And if we do, where can we find them? And the second part of that question is, is there a season on crawdads here in Idaho?
Sure, Evan, thanks. And thanks for the question. For crayfish, you do need a valid fishing license, but they are classified as non-game, so there isn't any limit on them. And as long as the water that you are trying to retrieve them out of is open for fishing, you can set crawdad traps, and you can have 5 traps max before you need to apply with us for a commercial license. And you can find them. CJ Strike's a pretty popular spot. We've got some pretty honking ones in there. The Riddle Lake reservoirs, so Grassmere Reservoir, Bybee, and Shoefly reservoirs also have crawdads. And in the Boise and Snake Rivers, there's some pretty good sized ones as well.
Thank you, Cindy. Our next question is for Jordan up in McCall. And again, this is another question that I might have submitted. Jordan, why can't I catch anything in Payette Lake? Are there any fish in Payette Lake?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So there's actually probably more species of fish in Payette Lake than most people are aware of. There are smallmouth bass and perch in Payette Lake, and a little known fact is that the way perch initially got into Cascade Reservoir after the dam was built was by swimming downstream out of Payette Lake. We first stocked perch in Payette Lake in the 1920s, and they found their way down into Cascade. But no, we don't grow jumbo perching in Payette. They mostly hang out around the shoreline. Same with the smallmouth bass, and they're pretty small for the most part. There's a lot of pike minnow, whitefish, rainbows, kokanee, and lake trout in Payette. And the primary fishery right now is lake trout. In the mid 90s, we had a pretty decent kokanee fishery there as well. We had 40 to 60,000 kokanee running up the inlet, the North Fork Payette River, the inlet to Payette Lake every year to spawn. And Payette Lake produced a pretty decent kokanee fishery at that time. And also during that time, lake trout were in fairly low abundance, and folks that could get out and target lake trout were catching 15 to 30 pound fish pretty regularly. In the early 2000s, lake trout really increased in abundance, and they kind of crashed out the kokanee population. And so right now, if you're a lake trout angler, you can still catch quite a few lake trout out there. Their condition is improving because we've been suppressing them somewhat to reduce numbers and improve growth and try to get more kokanee back. We've seen about a 3-fold increase in kokanee production, natural kokanee production over the last couple of years as a result of the lake trout suppression. And then we've also just started stocking kokanee again last year, and we're going to continue to do that every year. And we're hopeful that we're going to see some pretty good results from that and see a better kokanee fishery produced in Payette as a result. We also stock about 15 to 1,000 catchable rainbow trout in Payette every year. And one of our stocking locations is at the Ponderosa State Park boat ramp on the peninsula. And I've heard people having great catch rates out there during the summer, during the time period that we're stocking catchables out there. So if you're kind of a general trout angler, you want to fly fish on the surface or throw some spinners or throw some worms out there, I would suggest maybe trying off of Ponderosa Point, out by the boat ramp, kind of closer to where we stock fish. But if you want to get into catching potentially some, 20 to 30 pound lake trout too, that's a little bit more of a specialized fishery. Those fish hang out down deep. And so you're going to need to be able to have the right gear and the right knowledge to know where to target those fish. And there's lots of great resources out there on the internet to figure out how to target lake trout. But I'm also happy to chat with you anytime if you wanted to call the McCall Fish and Game office and chat with myself or Mike or Josh. We'd be happy to point you in the right direction. So thanks for the question again.
Thank you, Jordan. Our next question, we're going to go back to Tim. This is in regards to the South Fork of the Boise River. Is there a reason why we can't have a catch and release only season on the South Fork, but have it open year round?
Thanks for that, Evan. And yeah, thanks for the questions. So currently we do have a catch and release only section or season on the South Fork Boise that runs from the 1st of December through March 31st. So yeah, that during that time period, the South Fork Boise is currently a catch and release fishery. The reason that we do have, I guess, I believe the question is about the open year round, referring to the seasonal closure. So the closure was put in place. The South Fork Boise, as you know, is a tailwater fishery below Anderson Ranch Reservoir. And so as such, it's pretty limited in terms of spawning substrates. So there's not a lot of gravel inputs that make those nice places, spawning beds for trout. And so we've got that closure in place to protect the spawning fish. The South Fork Boise was one of the first designated streams in Idaho with our trophy trout regulation. And we want to continue to be able to provide that for anglers. So yeah, that's why we've got that spawning closure in place. And with that, I'll send it back to Evan.
Thank you, Tim. Our next question is for Mike. Mike, this viewer says, I understand that Fish and Game's management approach for Lost Valley Reservoir is to chemically treat the reservoir every few years to kill stunted perch and increase catch rates for rainbow trout. Would you consider an alternative strategy like stocking a predator, such as northern pike, to reduce perch numbers?
Hey, Evan. Yeah, that's a really interesting idea and something that we definitely consider. But in the last few years, we've learned that periodic drawdowns, just about till it's a mud flat, can result in fewer of those stunted yellow perch surviving over winter. And we've also seen some improvements in catch rates and condition of stocked rainbow trout. But we're always looking for ways to be more efficient and things that don't require such labor intensive things like rotenone. So periodic drawdowns might work, but certainly stocking a predator like that is an option. If we were to stock a predator like pike into the lake, we definitely want them to be sterile to minimize any unintended consequences. We don't want a bunch of stunted pike either, but that's certainly doable. We stock sterile tiger muskie into several lakes in the region. So that's something we'll probably look into. And I really appreciate whoever brought that up. It's those kind of ideas are awesome to hear from anglers and a big value to meetings like this. So thanks.
Thank you, Mike. We're going to go back to Cindy again now. Cindy, this question is regarding red band trout, which some folks might not even know what a red band is, but this viewer says, where can I catch red bands, and are there a lot of them?
Yeah, thanks, Evan. Yeah, great question. So this is a fish that's near and dear to my heart. So red band trout is actually a subspecies of a coastal rainbow trout that are native to Idaho. So they're native to the Columbia River drainage, and sometimes you can hear them referred to as interior red band trout. And they have a pretty wide distribution throughout Idaho, and especially here in the Southwest region, we have quite a few of them. You can catch them in mountain streams like Squaw Creek, way up in the Payette drainage above Sweet, Idaho. And they're also found in desert streams down in the Oahe Mountains. And if you want to go down there to chase these fish, you can go to Big Jacks and Little Jacks creeks outside of kind of the Grandview, Bruno, Idaho area. Those kind of the more popular desert areas. A little closer to Treasure Valley, Jump Creek is a really neat spot to explore. There's a really neat canyon and waterfall and some fish out there to catch. And kind of just, they're pretty similar to like cutthroat fishing on a small stream, kind of whatever you would use tackle wise for fish in any stream. So lots of, I'd recommend kind of chasing them with a fly rod just because it might be a little easier to kind of maneuver around things. The streams that you're going to be fishing for a red band on are pretty small. So kind of having a little bit of maneuverability and finesse will be required, but they're beautiful and they're well worth your effort, and you can get to some really neat places to chase red band trout. Send it back to you, Evan.
Thank you, Cindy. Our next question is for Jordan. And this isn't, this is a question for later this week. Jordan, are the big rainbows running up the North Fork of the Payette River in McCall yet?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, there's definitely some of those fish are out there right now. So what this question's referring to is the not so secret of the big adfluvial, meaning migratory rainbow trout that come out of Cascade to spawn up in the tributaries, the North Fork Payette, Lake Fork Creek, and the Gold Fork River. Some of those fish actually enter out of Cascade in the fall and will do a little bit of overwintering down in the lower portion of those stream sections. But then the majority of them will come up to spawn in the spring. And Evan gave me a heads up that this question was coming. So I pulled up a flow chart here that I want to share really quickly. So this graph is showing the flow discharge on the North Fork Payette River at McCall over the last 5 years, with 2021 being that red line that's down at base flow, ending at about where we are, the end of March right now. So those big rainbows spawn in the North Fork Payette up around McCall about the second week of May, so kind of towards the upper end of the ascending limb of the hydrograph. And so really this whole month of April, particularly when we're at kind of this base flow period, is when the fishing's really good for those fish. And they're 18 to 20 plus inches and fight like steelhead. So I would highly recommend getting after them if you have a chance. Please keep in mind that the regulations on that stretch of river are catch and release only, no bait, until the Friday before Memorial Day weekend. Thanks, Evan.
Thank you, Jordan. That sounds like a great opportunity. Our next question is for Cindy again. Changing gears here, Cindy, we've got a question regarding the Treasure Valley ponds here locally. My kids enjoy fishing for catfish in some of the Treasure Valley ponds. Can more catfish be stocked in these ponds?
Yeah, thanks, Evan. Thanks for the question. So, yeah, this is a kind of a unique kind of thing that we do. So our regional crew transfers catfish into a handful of community ponds every year. And receiving ponds can vary by year. They're scattered throughout the Treasure Valley and as far away as the Horseshoe Bend Mill Pond. And we get these fish from different stretches of the Snake River, and we try and move around each year so that we don't deplete any one area of the Snake River while we're doing this. Last year, we moved about 150 fish, so like 20-ish, depending on the size of the pond, would go into each pond. We moved catfish to 7 community ponds last year. And we plan to continue this stocking program since it's become really popular with local anglers and kind of provides a unique diversity of fishing opportunity in our community ponds. It's Not too often you can pull a 30-inch flathead out of a little community pond. So yeah, a lot of people enjoy it. And there's actually a fun video to watch of us catching those fish out on the Snake River on our website from last summer. We also transfer some other warm water species like smallmouth and largemouth bass and sometimes bluegill into those community ponds. And that's just kind of a way to supplement the angling pressure and provide some opportunity in places where we wouldn't necessarily get that natural reproduction. So yeah, we will definitely be stocking some more catfish. It's a fun time. I'll send it back to you, Evan.
Thank you, Cindy. Our next question is for John Casanelli. This viewer says, often when I'm fishing, I see anglers dragging fish up on the bank or holding them out of the water to take pictures. Isn't this bad for the fish? Should Fish and Game make it illegal to take fish out of the water unless the angler plans to keep the fish?
Thanks, Evan, and thanks for that question. Yeah, so this is one that I think has gained a lot of traction over the last handful of years. I think it kind of coincides with the social media craze. And so with all of the Instagram and Facebook and all these online pictures that you see of people taking pictures of fish, there's been a lot of concern when people are talking about catch and release and you see people with their fingers in the gills of fish, or you see sand all over the fish because it was on the ground. And so I think through that process, a lot of anglers have kind of began to pay more attention to proper catch and release practices. And we've had things like keep fish wet, which was formerly keep them wet. That was a hashtag that folks were using. And so I guess one of the things that we've seen in management is that the scales were kind of starting to tip that way a little quicker than we ever anticipated. And there was also a lot of university research coming out from various labs across the country and in Canada that was doing work talking about time out of water and air exposure and how bad it was for fish. And as a fish management agency, this concerned us a little bit because we were not wanting to get to the point where we were getting pressure to have these types of regulations where you couldn't even hold a fish out of the water to take a picture of it if it wasn't biologically warranted. And so starting about 5 or 6 years ago, we started working with the University of Idaho and our own fish research staff to do a lot of internal research on this topic because there wasn't a lot of research out there that we felt was done the way it needed to be done. And so through the University of Idaho and through our own research shop, we did a lot of different studies looking at air exposure and its effects on delayed mortality, even spawning and reproductive success. And basically, we're able to show that, and there's a lot of published literature out there on this, that we kept bull trout and brook trout and rainbow trout and cutthroat trout out of the water for up to a minute. And we went out and observed anglers doing all sorts of different angling and found that on average, anglers will keep fish out of the water maybe 20 seconds to take a picture, to release it, to do what they're going to do. And so most anglers are getting fish back in the water relatively quickly. And even if we kept fish out of the water for a minute, there was no detrimental effect on those fish in the long term. And so we do have a section in our regulations where we talk about catch and release. We encourage people to keep fish in the water as much as you can. Use wet hands when you're handling fish. Use a non-abrasive net. There's a lot of things that you can do to help the fish when you catch and release those fish. And yeah, we don't want to see people dragging fish up in the rocks or through the gravel and then grabbing those fish and throwing them back in the river. And a lot of that's just through education. And we continue to do outreach on best practices, but we do not want to regulate that and tell people they don't have the right to take a fish out of the water and take one of those pictures. All the pictures you saw of us in our intro, most of those were us fishing, and we're all holding fish out of the water to get those glory shots. We all enjoy those. As long as you do it right, you're not having any sort of population impact on the fish. You're not really putting that fish in jeopardy. Back to you, Evan.
Thank you, John. Our next question is for Jordan. Jordan, what is the status of walleye in Lake Cascade? And is there potential for Lake Cascade to become a world-class walleye fishery as it is for perch?
Thanks, Evan, and thanks for bringing that up, whoever submitted that question. So walleye were reported as caught in Cascade in 2018. This was one single fish, and it was just a photo report with really nothing to be sure that it came from Cascade. It had us all really concerned though, because we have no idea what walleye would do in Cascade. There's certainly potential that Cascade could become a world-class walleye fishery, but there's also potential that if walleye became established, it could be catastrophic to the system. And that's not really a risk that anyone should want to take when we're talking about a world-class perch fishery as is. We do enough sampling in Cascade, annual sampling, that if walleye had become established there, we're pretty confident that we would have documented them, and we haven't documented them at all in all of our sampling. So that's not to say they aren't there, but if they haven't become well established yet. Like I said, Cascade's currently one of the best, if not the best, perch fisheries in the world, and allowing walleye to become established there could potentially ruin that amazing fishery, and that's not something that we should be in favor of. So yeah, fingers crossed that was a farce and there was not a walleye caught out of Cascade, or if it was, hopefully that was the only one and we never see another one.
Thank you, Jordan. Our next question is for John. John, with the growing human population, both here in the Valley and across Idaho, do you foresee the need for any management changes in response to that population growth?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Evan. That's another common one that we often talk about and hear about. So it's no secret that Idaho is one of the fastest growing, and specifically the Treasure Valley is one of the fastest growing areas in the country. So our population is growing exponentially, and most people are not moving to Idaho because they like to sit indoors and be in the city. They're moving to Idaho because of what Idaho has to offer, and they want to be outside, they want to fish, they want to raft, they want to hike, they want to bike. And so we're seeing a pretty substantial increase use in a lot of our resources across the state, and we see bigger crowds at our access sites. We see bigger crowds on a lot of our waters, and so I think that's been kind of the nexus for a lot of the questions we've gotten tonight. People talking about perch harvest and crappie harvest and the lower Boise River. People see increased use, and I think that's even been further amplified by the COVID pandemic and more people being outside. And so we often are asked, how are we going to deal with that, or what's our management strategy? And I guess what I'll just briefly talk about is, fish aren't like big game, right? In that you have a certain number of elk that can be killed in a unit, and the more people that are put in for those tags, the lower percentage of them get to go hunt, because once they kill an elk, that elk's dead. Fish can be caught multiple times, and the same fish can be reused by multiple anglers. And so we do have a lot of catch and release fishing. We control the fish population, not the angler effort. And so fishing and angler effort kind of self-polices itself, I guess I'll say. Crowds people will only fish to a certain point in certain waters until they feel like it's too crowded and they don't want to go there anymore. And so our responsibility as fish managers is to make sure that fish population is doing what we want it to do, that our harvest and regulations are set right so that population can persist and provide a fishery. And so we control the fish, and we'll continue to use tools like Tag Your It. You've heard Tag Your It talked about multiple times tonight, and it's been around long enough that I imagine most of you are familiar with it or know what it is. So we're essentially using those bright orange spaghetti tags or ploy tags you see sticking out of a fish's dorsal or out of their back that have numbers and identifiers on them. We can use those tags to get at angler catch and harvest of any type of species of fish, really in any fishery across the state. That research was developed in Idaho, that program, and it won an award in 2012, a national award, national research award, because it was kind of such a groundbreaking methodology. And so that tool has been really valuable for us to monitor fish populations. We continue to use it, and we'll continue to monitor how fish are responding to increased pressure. And that's kind of where the rubber meets the road in fish management, is making sure that we're managing the population and that we're responding to the use by the anglers. Back to you, Evan.
Thank you, John. Our next question is for Tim. Let's see if I can find it here. There we are. Tim, has Fish and Game considered making the entire Middle Fork Boise River fly fishing only?
Thanks, Evan. And yeah, thanks to whomever submitted that question. So currently the Middle Fork Boise already, at least from the confluence with the North Fork Boise up to the Atlanta Township, already has a special regulation, and that is the kind of our standard two trout, no bait, and barbless regulations. And so making it a fly fishing only, that's not something that the department is particularly interested in. We don't want to, limit opportunity or disproportionately affect a single user group. So, there are folks that are fishing the Middle Fork Boise that are using kind of conventional tackle, spinning gear. And by making it a fly fishing only, we would obviously disproportionately affect that user group in favor of a fly fishing only. And that really doesn't align with some of our management goals. So I guess that's kind of a short answer. And if somebody wants to talk about that further, John's email and my email were on that opening slide. And yeah, we can discuss that a little bit further. So I'll send it back to you, Evan.
Thank you, Tim. Our next question is for Cindy. Cindy, I've seen a couple different reports on state record catch and release Lahontan cutthroat trout from the Southwest region. Where are these fish and how do I catch one?
Yeah, thanks, Evan. Thanks to whoever submitted that question. This is kind of an exciting opportunity that, has been gaining some traction, especially this year. Tim and I have both fielded some calls on this. Seems that folks are kind of keying into this fishery. So Lahontan cutthroat trout is not native to Idaho. They're actually native to northern Nevada, like southern Oregon, and eastern California. If you're familiar with Pyramid Lake, that's the species that folks are traveling down there to fish for. So these fish are known for their ability to survive and grow to really large size in kind of alkaline or brackish, salty kind of water where you wouldn't really expect a trout to necessarily do well, but Lahontans, they love it. They can grow to be extremely large. They're largest of the cutthroat trout subspecies. So they can be real fun to catch. And in Idaho, we stock them in several reservoirs near Riddle, Idaho, so down near the Nevada border. The current catch and release record is out of Grassmere Reservoir. They're also stocked in Bybee Reservoir and Shoefly. Shoefly will be stocked next year, but Grassmere and Bybee should both be getting fish again this year. Kind of what you would expect with this fish, anything that you would fish, any tackle you would use for still water trout fishing, you could use to catch a Lahontan. So you can do it from the bank. A lot of people use float tubes or small boats down on those reservoirs. So you can throw spoons, spinners, rooster tails all the way to fly fishing. And even some years, if the winter conditions allow, you can actually even ice fish on those reservoirs for Lahontans. So we'll send it back to Evan.
Thank you, Cindy. Our next question is for Mike. Jordan touched on this a little bit, but I think Mike might be able to share a few more details with us that Jordan didn't mention. But Mike, can you provide a Payette Lake status update? I know you've been suppressing lake trout in the lake and have started stocking kokanee again. What are the goals of this effort and how is it going?
You bet, Evan. So first, I just want to make it clear that our goal in Payette Lake is not to eradicate the lake trout, but rather to reduce their abundance such that the kokanee population can recover, which in the end is going to be a really good thing for lake trout. And Jordan touched on how in the late 90s was kind of the heyday of the Payette Lake trophy lake trout fishery, lots of kokanee spawning. But in the mid 2000s, again, lake trout grew in abundance and ate themselves out of house and home. And I'm going to pull up a quick figure here as I keep talking about our goals. And this is something, so this figure right here, it shows condition, which is kind of like a plumpness measure, like a fatness measure in the fish. And this is mean condition throughout these years. And obviously you can see how in the 90s, it was really high condition. Anything over 100 is exceptional. And you can see how in the mid 2000s, it collapsed. So since 2014, we stopped stocking kokanee because they weren't surviving. And we began suppressing the lake trout population, so thinning them out with gill nets. And particularly in 2018, 19, and 20, the last 3 years, we've really ramped up that effort. And that's when we've removed the majority of the lake trout. So since we've started this effort, we've removed just over 2,000 lake trout. And we recently, last year, started noticing a slight drop in the average number of lake trout that we're catching in our gill nets, which indicates that we are having a population level impact. And this clearly shows that that condition is increasing each year that we've been doing this. As well as Jordan mentioned, we saw a threefold increase in natural production of kokanee. And so last year, as the question or comment mentions, we began restocking kokanee in Payette Lake, and we're doing it in different locations to see if that increases survival. But ultimately, our goal being to restore a balanced fishery, the metric that we're using is kokanee survival and abundance. We'd like to see abundant kokanee in the 10 to 12 inch range. And when that happens, we fully expect the lake trout to work their way back up to where they were before. So our current management plan directs us to continue this effort until 2024. But in the meantime, we're also developing some new sampling strategies on Payette that should provide some new information on the relationship between kokanee and lake trout in the lake. And we also hope this year to hold or host some kind of state of the lake meeting to give a more detailed review of what we've learned so far. So hope that's a satisfactory update, Evan.
Sounds good, Mike. Thank you. Our next question is for Jordan. And this is not so much a scoping question as I need to go fishing and I want to know where a great place is to fish. Where is the best place to fish for cutthroat trout in the McCall area?
Sure. Thanks for the question. So a lot of people come into our office and ask where they can go fly fishing for cutthroat around here. And I think what they're generally referring to is stream fishing for cutthroat. And I explain to them that a lot of the streams in the North Fork Payette system right here around McCall, at least, are, they're coming off of the Idaho batholith and very nutrient poor system. And we just don't have a lot of trout production in these streams here right around McCall. However, our high mountain lake fishing is phenomenal. We stock cutthroat, rainbows, grayling, and golden trout in about 160 lakes in our region on a 3-year rotation. And then in addition to that, there's some lakes that produce cutthroat naturally as a result of historic stocking, where we don't stock anymore, but they're still naturally reproducing. If folks do want to get into some stream fishing for wild cutthroat, though, it's a pretty short jaunt east of here to get over into the South Fork Salmon River drainage, the East Fork, South Fork, Johnson Creek, and then hopping over Profile Summit into Upper Big Creek as well, into Edwardsburg, part of the Middle Fork Salmon River drainage. And there's awesome cutthroat fishing in there as well as fishing for some big fluvial bull trout at certain times of the year as well. Again, just keep in mind that the South Fork system and the Middle Fork system are both catch and release only for trout year round. So again, feel free to call the McCall office anytime if you're planning a fishing trip and want to know, some lakes to go to or where to access some of those rivers that I just talked about, and I'll be happy to point you in the right direction. Thanks.
Thank you, Jordan. Our next question is for John. John, this viewer asks, can more hatchery rainbows be stocked into regional waters?
Yeah, thanks, Evan. Yeah, so that's a question. So questions related to hatchery fish are pretty common, and that's a good question. And so oftentimes people want to know if we can just put more fish, stock more frequently, put more fish in when we stock. And so I guess the first thing I would mention is that, our hatchery product or our hatchery space is finite. We only have so many hatcheries and a certain budget allocated to hatchery fish. We do have some opportunities to purchase hatchery fish from a third party as well, and we do that from time to time. But those costs add up, and raising fish is a fairly expensive endeavor. And so we have a certain number of fish across the state, and I will say that, currently we're stocking almost 500,000 catchables in the Southwest region between McCall and Nampa. We put about 250,000 annually in the Nampa subregion and about 220,000 annually in the McCall subregion. And then we're putting almost 22 million fingerlings between the two subregions. Those include, kokanee fingerlings, Chinook fingerlings, the Lahot and cutthroat fingerlings that Cindy talked about. And so we're putting a lot of fish on the landscape. I think more important than can we put more of them out there is the fact that we are continually refining where we put these fish. And so we've mentioned multiple times tonight the Tag Your It program. I'll give it another plug right now and talk about that. We use that program extensively in the hatchery catchable world to kind of figure out where the best places are to put fish and where our fish are getting caught and where maybe they're not getting used as much by anglers. And so we're pretty good about refining some of our stocking practices to kind of maximize the use of our fish in certain waters and certain time frames. Jordan's staff and my staff are continually sampling high mountain lakes and refining some of our high mountain lake stocking and moving fish around places that have natural production that we don't need to stock hatchery fish on top of, places where we maybe get winter kill and those fish don't survive. And so we are all the time, we are continuing to modify our hatchery stocking and try to maximize that and get the most bang for our buck. So the short answer is no, there's not more fish to put out there, but we can do a better job with what we have, and we're continuing to find ways to do that. Evan, back to you.
Thank you, John. Our next question is for Cindy. Cindy, this viewer says, I would like to see some trophy fishing opportunity for bass and possibly trout in the Treasure Valley, Emmett, Payette area. Something with a limit over the current 12-inch minimum for bass. Would Fish and Game consider such a proposal?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Evan. So the quick answer is yes. So if you watched John's video, the pre-recorded video, we are actually considering a proposal to adopt a trophy bass regulation at Dick Knox Pond up in Emmett. And this would, you've heard this theme a couple times tonight too, is allowing for some diversity of our regulations while keeping them as simple as we can, but kind of providing some different opportunities here and there. And that's what would be happening in Dick Knox Pond, since we would keep the general regulation in place basically right across the road at Sawyer's Pond, so you could kind of chase some different sized bass in Emmett. And our crew actually is going to be going out to Dick Knox in a couple of weeks. We like to have a little bit of data, obviously, to kind of back ourselves up and kind of figure out what that population looks like prior to a change like that. And then we will continue to monitor as that regulation kind of progresses. So we're going to look to gain some more knowledge about the size structure of the bass that are currently in that pond and kind of get an idea of what appropriate regulation might look like. For anybody watching, if you're familiar with that fishery and you have an idea for maybe what that trophy regulation, what you'd like to see at Dick Knox Pond, you are more than welcome, and we welcome your suggestions to send along your thoughts on our fish scoping page on the website, and you can do that until April 11th.
Thank you, Cindy. Our next question is going to go back up to the McCall area to Mike. Mike, this is a two-parter for you this evening. When is the best time to fish for smallmouth bass and tiger muskie in Little Payette Lake? And the second half of that question, how do I fish for them?
Evan, I love talking about bass fishing, and Little Payette Lake can be really, really good. So we've been transplanting fish from Brownlee Reservoir into Little Payette Lake, and it is managed with trophy regulations. And we've been stocking tiger muskie for quite a while now, and we hold the world record, caught in 2013. And when we sample it with gill nets, we still see some really big tiger muskie. The time of year, there's kind of two main periods that would be really good. The first is a little bit after ice out, so mid to late June. And if you have a kayak or a canoe or something, all the shallow flooded vegetation on the northeast side holds a lot of smallmouth. One of the problems is there are so many stumps and so much good cover and structure that you might find yourself casting quite a bit, but the fish are worth it. And then tiger muskie, of course, they don't spawn, but shortly after ice out, they'll definitely move up shallow, really, really shallow, to digest food in the warmer water. And so sometimes, I know it's common up in the panhandle for pike and things to kind of sight fish for them earlier in the year. And then Little Payette Lake is a pretty crazy lake. It goes from 1,400 acres to 400 acres in late August and September. And when that happens, the smallmouth are going to school up and they're going to kind of go offshore. And the muskie we kind of find them mostly out by the dam. So look for those deep drop-offs next to shallow feeding flats and stuff, and give it a shot. If you figure out how to catch tiger muskie, or if anybody does up there, I'd love to hear more about it. So feel free to give me a call or send me an email, but that should get you started. Certainly early summer and in the fall.
Thank you, Mike. Well, folks, we have reached the end of our time together this evening. That's all the questions that we have tonight. So thank you for taking the time to attend this evening. I hope that you found the time well spent. Remember that you can still submit your questions or your proposals via the webpage, and that we need to receive your comments or suggestions by Sunday, April 11th. And if you'd like to listen to all or part of this presentation again, it is being recorded and will be posted on the Fish and Game website here in the next few days. I think that's it for tonight. So thank you all very much for joining us. Have a great evening.